You ever have one of those ordinary days that for no good reason turns into the kind of story people tell at parties? This is one of those. Picture a sunny Tuesday, a mid-sized airport. Gate 12, people with rolling suitcases, overpriced coffee cups. The tired shuffle of business travel. My name's Aaron Cole, and I want you to sit with me for a little while because what happened that day changed me. And maybe it will change how you think about standing up too. Act 1. Hook, I stepped onto Flight 212 like any other passenger. Same hoodie I'd worn 100 times, a battered backpack, a not-so-fancy paperback about airline safety in my lap. I'd been traveling under the radar on purpose. Sometimes you have to fly incognito when you're trying to see how the machine treats people, not just read the manual. I took my seat in the second row and opened the book. That should have been the end of it, but then a man in a suit from a different century walked up the aisle like he owned the oxygen, and he decided to make my life his entertainment. He didn't whisper, he announced it. "Sir, that seat isn't for people like you. Move." He said it loud enough for half the cabin to hear, like he was reading policy while he practiced contempt. I felt the blood rush to my ears, a strange calm in my chest. Weird, like some part of me had been waiting for that exact moment. People glanced up, phones flicked on the engine of ordinary travel idling behind everything. The flight attendant did what most flight attendants do. First, she looked uncomfortable. But that look, that pause would become the hinge for everything that followed. Act 2. The struggle and a turning point. The man, let's call him Thomas Avery, was polished expensive, a brand of confidence you can't fake. He demanded my ID, my card, my story. As if the smell of my hoodie was proof of some financial crime. He mocked the student credit card I pulled out. He scoffed at my answers. He poured water on my head like he was rinsing away my audacity to exist in first class, and when I didn't break, he punched me. Yes, he raised his fist, and the sound of it meeting my face was the cleanest punctuation I've ever heard. What you need to understand is not the drama of the punch. You can find that on every viral clip, it's the inner math of what led to the moment and what came after. I grew up on the edges of things single mom, secondhand textbooks, a childhood where doors were always a fraction closed. That life teaches you something. You either make yourself small or you make a plan. I chose the plan. I learned algorithms that could rearrange planes' guts and save an airline millions, and I learned to watch people, not to judge them, but to map how power actually moved in small moments like a pushy boarding call or a flight attendant's hesitation. So when Thomas humiliated me, when he thought pouring water in a fist would finish the story, I started doing what I'd always planned to do. I collected everything. Not with the drama of revenge, but with the patience of someone building a case. I kept track of witnesses who stepped in, the person who began recording the flight attendant's tablet log, the exact words people used as the cabin shifted from awkward silence to public outrage. I called a lawyer, then another, then the person who runs security at the agency that regulates airlines. I called my counsel, and then I called a woman named Dana in crisis management who knows how to move armies. PR, legal federal contacts, the kind of people who don't talk in panic, they talk in protocol. And in the middle of the chaos, bleeding and calm, I started to make those calls out loud so everyone could hear the orders being placed, the net being drawn, because when the story lives in the open, it becomes harder to gaslight. This is where the cinematic stuff matters. Thomas, towering over me, still chest-heaving, expecting applause. A teacher in row 4 said, "Hey, that's enough," and stuck his phone out to record. A nurse applied pressure to my cut and said, "We need the captain." The cabin had become a courtroom and a newsroom at the same time. When I said my name and the flight attendant read my ID, nobody cared until I said what most people never say out loud. In that moment, I own this airline. It's a weird thing to declare when you've got blood on your shirt, but it was true. I had built something small from nothing, and I'd done it for exactly the reason this man thought he could push me out of place. You could see his mind try to pivot. Pride tries to rewrite facts. But I wasn't interested in personal humiliation. I wanted structural change. So instead of screaming, I started deploying authority. "Notify federal marshals," I said. Divert to the nearest airport. Document everything. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. People listened because the words had teeth. I wasn't trying to humiliate Thomas for the joy of it. I was making sure that the consequences weren't optional. Act 3. Victory and open ending. We landed under a storm of microphones and sirens. The man who'd thought a suit could protect him from consequences got his Miranda rights read in front of 100 phones and a fleet of reporters. He sat there handcuffed, finally. Small. My cut got stitched. Statements were taken, but the real change came after I fired a list of employees whose files had the pattern of bias I'd been tracking for months. I launched an internal overhaul of training, and I opened up the tools my team built so any smaller airline could use them. The point wasn't to crush one guy, it was to make sure no one else slid silently into that behavior because they thought there were no repercussions. But here's the part that never feels neat. Victory is messy. Some people called me vindictive, a showman. Others called it justice. Friends of Thomas said his life was ruined overnight. Friends of mine said it was overdue. There were op-eds, think pieces, late-night jokes, and underneath them all, real humans trying to parse what fairness looks like when the scales are tipped. I don't pretend every firing, every policy tweak fixed everything. Systems are stubborn. People are stubborn. But for one afternoon, the person who was supposed to be untouchable learned that accountability could find him on a plane at 2 p.m. Emotional core. Why this mattered to me, and why it should matter to you. Growing up, the message was subtle but clear. You belong in certain spaces only if you make yourself small enough, quiet enough, polished enough. My whole life was an attempt to prove that wrong. The scariest part isn't being punched, it's noticing how many people can stand by while cruelty happens. The bravest part is when strangers put down their coffee cups, raise their phones, and step into the story with you. That's where change starts, not with one righteous blow, but with a chorus of witnesses who refuse to look away. So, what do I want you to do besides hear me out? First, think about the last time you saw someone treated like they didn't belong. What did you do second? If you've got a story where the system failed someone you care about, tell it, document it, speak up, build the network. And third, disagree with me if you want this whole thing is meant to make you uncomfortable. Was I too public, too merciless with people's livelihoods? Maybe. But if the choice is to preserve someone's career over someone's dignity, I know which side I'm on. I'll leave you with this. Dignity isn't a VIP section, it's a baseline. If a person in a suit can pour water on another human's head and think nothing will follow, then dignity is on life support. But if people are willing to record to call to hold systems accountable, then dignity becomes a practice, not a wish. You get to choose whether you practice it. If this hit you angry, relieved, or somewhere in between, tell me in the comments. Tell me the time you saw someone pushed out of place and what you did or didn't do. Was it right to make this public? Was it justice or spectacle? I want honest answers. That's how we learn. Hit. Like if you think witnessing matters, subscribe if you want more stories about ordinary people using their voices, and share this with someone who needs the reminder you deserve to be where you sit, no matter what your hoodie looks like.